"We have these amazing wings," said a tiny voice. It wasn't Kirito who spoke up but a little pixie named Yui. She was perched on his jacket collar, looking cute. "Humans are really complicated," she said. Yui jumped into the air, her movements making a fun jingling sound. She landed on Kirito's other shoulder and crossed her arms. Looking puzzled. "I don't get why humans make it so hard to understand each other," she muttered. Leafa stared at Yui in surprise. For a moment she forgot that Yui was just a computer program. "What do you mean by the search for?" she asked. Yui explained. "I think people mostly want to connect with others and understand their feelings. That's what drives a lot of what they do." Yui's hand shot up and gently touched Kirito's cheek. Then, she gave him a quick sweet kiss. "This is how I show desire," she said with a smile. Leafa's eyes grew wide in surprise, but Kirito just chuckled nervously and playfully tapped Yui on the head. "Things aren't that simple in the real world," he said with a laugh. "If everyone tried that, they'd break the rules and get kicked out. It's all about how you do it, right?" Just then, Leafa jumped into the conversation. "Don't listen to that, Yui," she said. "Wow. Your AI is really something special. Are all private pixies like her?" Kirito chuckled and picked up Yui, putting her back in his pocket. "No way, she's one of a kind," he said with a smile. "I see," Leafa replied, looking curious. "Looking for someone's heart, huh?" she said again, stretching her back. Leafa had always dreamed of flying as far as possible in this world. But maybe deep down, she just wanted to connect with someone. A face popped into her head: Kazuto's. Her heart skipped a beat. Maybe what she really wanted was to use her fairy wings to soar over all the obstacles in life, and reach Kazuto's heart. "Yeah, right," she thought, shaking her head. She was probably just thinking too much. "I just want to fly. That's all I can think about." Did you say something?" "And no, nothing. Let's get moving, shall we?" Leafa smiled at Kirito, and gazed up at the sky. The golden clouds from sunrise had disappeared, leaving a brilliant blue canvas behind. It was shaping up to be an amazing day. On the platform, there was a special monument called a locator stone. Leafa told Kirito to use it. It would mark his spot so he could come back later. Leafa stretched and flapped her four wings, getting ready to take off. "All set?" she asked Kirito. He checked with the tiny pixie in his pocket to make sure she was good to go too. Just as they were about to fly away, a voice called out behind them. "Leafa!" The guy came tumbling out of the elevator, rushing to catch up. Leafa landed back on the platform and turned to face him.
"Oh, Reckon,"
she said. Recon looked frustrated. "This isn't right. You could've told me you were leaving before you took off." Leaf apologized. "Sorry, Recon, I totally forgot." Recon tried to calm down and looked up at Leafa with a serious expression. "I heard you're ditching the party," he asked. Leafa explained. "Yeah, it was kind of an impulse decision." "What's your next move?" one of them asked. The other smiled. "It's pretty clear, isn't it? My sword is meant for you, Leafa." But Leafa didn't seem impressed. "I didn't ask you to do that," she said with a frown. Recon looked down, his shoulders slumping in disappointment. But he wasn't about to give up. "I want to go with you, of course. But something's bugging me." Leafa raised an eyebrow, curious. "What is it?" she asked. Recon hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "I'm not really sure yet. I just need to figure some things out. I'm sticking with Sigurd's group for now." "Kirito, listen up. I've got a serious warning for you. Leafa has a bad habit of jumping into trouble without thinking. So keep an eye out for her." Kirito nodded, looking kind of amused. "Got it," he said. Just then, the guy tried to say something else. But Leafa cut him off in a big way. She kicked him hard on the foot with her boot. "Oh, Gak!" he yelped. Leafa told Kirito, "I'm going neutral for a while, so send me a message if anything important happens." Then she quickly spread her wings and flew away. Leafa waved down at Recon, who looked up with a scowl. "Don't forget to keep practicing your flying skills while I'm away," she said, "and stay out of the salamander territory, okay? Bye." Recon's face crumpled as he called out, "Be careful, Leafa, I'll catch up to you soon." Tears welled up in his eyes, and Leafa felt a pang of surprise. She was going to see him at school tomorrow, after all, but as she turned away she couldn't shake off the feeling that their goodbye had touched her heart. She turned to the northeast and stretched out her wings. letting the wind carry her. Kirito zoomed up beside her in no time, trying his best to hide a big smile. "Is he someone you know from real life?" he asked. She gave a vague answer. "You could say that." Kirito's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Oh," he said, clearly wanting more info. She played it cool. "What? Why is that interesting to you?" Kirito just shrugged. "It's nice, that's all." Just then, Yui piped up from Kirito's pocket. "I can tell how he's feeling." "Hey Lifa, he's got a crush on you," someone said with a grin. Lifa's face turned bright red as she shouted back. "I don't care." She started walking faster, trying to hide how embarrassed she felt. Usually Recon was pretty open about his feelings, and that was okay. But with Kirito around it made her feel weird and self-conscious. Before long they had left the town behind, and were surrounded by the forest's green trees. Lifa flipped onto her back, and gazed out at the Jade City getting smaller and smaller. She felt a pang of sadness about leaving Swilvan, the online world she'd called home for a year. But excitement took over. As she thought about exploring new places, she said a quiet goodbye, and turned back over. "Let's go. We can reach that lake in just one flight." She pointed to the sparkling water far away, and flapped her wings. Asuna sat on a huge bed in a birdcage, trying to ignore the creepy feeling of someone's finger sliding along her arm. Oberon lay next to her, wearing a long green toga that was all rumpled. He held her hand and rubbed her skin, his eyes fixed on her. Asuna closed her eyes, trying to tune him out. Lifa, on the other hand, was ready for adventure, eager to soar through the sky, and discover what lay ahead. Oberon's face looked even scarier than usual, and it was clear he was having fun messing with her. He knew she'd be totally under his control if he wanted. When he walked into the cage and flopped down on the bed, she didn't want to join him at first. But things changed when he started playing with her arm. She got so angry she almost hit him. The only reason she controlled herself and did what he said was because she knew how quickly his mood could change. She was afraid that if she made him mad, he'd take away the little bit of freedom she still had left. It seemed like he was waiting for her to push back, to see how far she would go. He'd drink in her anger and frustration, until he was satisfied. Then use his power to get what he wanted. For now though, she had some freedom. She could move around inside the cage as she pleased. She knew she had to stay calm if she wanted to escape, but there was only so much she could take. If he touched her in a way that made her feel uncomfortable or scared, she wouldn't hesitate to defend herself. She would punch him right in the face with her fist. Until then she froze like a statue, not moving a muscle. The man Oberon tried to get a reaction from her by stroking her arm, but she didn't flinch. Eventually he gave up, realizing he wasn't going to get her to react. He let go and sat up, a scowl on his face. "Why do you always have to be so stubborn?" he complained. There was something about the way he sounded that made her stomach turn. It was the same tone she remembered from someone else, someone who had hurt her deeply. "This isn't even your real body," he said, trying to reason with her. "You won't get hurt for real. Don't you ever get bored just hanging out in this virtual world all the time?" "Hey, can't you just relax and have fun?" one person asked. The other shook their head. "It doesn't matter if it's real or fake, it's all the same to me." The first person raised an eyebrow. "Why is that? Are you worried about losing your innocence or something?" The second person let out a low laugh. "I'm not going anywhere, until I get my way, and make my point clearer. You should try to make the most of your time here. This place has a really complex system that's like a super realistic simulation. Didn't you know that?" "I don't care about any of that," someone said. "I'm not gonna be stuck here forever. I know he'll come and rescue me." "Really? Are you talking about Kirito, the hero?" Asuna's body shook a little when she heard his name. Oberon's sly grin got even bigger as he sat up straight. He started talking faster, clearly excited that he had found a way to get to her. "What was his real name again?" "Kirigaya. I actually met him the other day," he said. As soon as she heard those words, Asuna's head snapped up and she stared right at him. "I'm telling you, I couldn't believe my eyes," he said with a huge grin on his face. The hero who beat Sao was just a skinny little boy. Is that what all super gamers look like? He was trying to get a rise out of her, and it was clear he was enjoying himself. "Guess where I ran into him? It was in your hospital room, standing right next to you. I have to tell you, it was pretty funny. I told him that we're getting married next month, and his face fell apart. You were lying in bed, and he was standing there looking like he'd just lost his best friend. I've seen dogs look happier when you take away their favorite toy. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. His whole body was shaking with laughter and he let out these weird little gasps of giggles. You really think that kid is gonna save you? He chuckled. I bet money that he's too scared to even wear a nerve gear again. And as for finding you here, forget about it. I totally forgot to send him a wedding invitation. He'll definitely come. Who wouldn't want to see you looking amazing in your wedding dress? I mean, we have to give our favorite hero something to look forward to, right? Asuna looked down and turned away from Oberon. She walked over to the big mirror hanging from the fancy frame above her bed, and stared at her reflection. Her shoulders slumped, and she gripped the cushions tightly. Unfortunately, the security cameras weren't working, so I don't have a video of his shocked face to show you, she said with a sigh. I wish I could have brought you a funny clip to watch. Maybe next time I'll be more prepared. For now though, it's time for me to go, Titania. Try to hold on until I see you in 2 days, Oberon said with a laugh. He turned and walked out the door, his long toga swaying behind him. Asuna watched him disappear from view in the mirror. She let out a few fake sobs, but inside she was super excited. Her biggest worry had been eating away at her since she got trapped in this weird new world. Was Kirito still alive? Now she finally knew. And the answer was yes. A scary thought had been creeping into her mind. What if she'd been sent somewhere else? And Kirito was really gone for good? It was an idea that made her heart feel heavy, even though she tried to tell herself it wasn't true. But then something unexpected happened. Oberon did something that made her forget all about that worry. It's weird, because he's actually a pretty smart guy. But sometimes he can do really dumb things. He's always been like that. Shugo just couldn't help himself. He loved to act superior and talk down to others. When Asuna's parents were around, he put on a charming face. But Asuna and her brother knew the real Sugo. They had seen him be really mean and insulting many times before. This was just another example of that. If Sugo truly wanted to break Asuna's spirit, talking trash about Kirito was definitely not the way to do it. Kirito should have told her he was dead. But the truth was amazing. He was actually alive. He had made it back to the real world. As she thought about this, she kept repeating the words to herself, like a happy mantra. Each time she said them, a fire in her heart grew stronger and brighter. If Kirito was really alive, she knew he wouldn't just stand by and do nothing about what was happening. She knew he'd find this game and come after her, so she couldn't just sit around waiting to be rescued. She had to take action, and try to escape on her own. She stood in front of the mirror, and pretended to be totally upset, trying to fool anyone who might be watching. As she gazed into the reflection, she caught Oberon turning around at the door, checking to see what she was up to. Her eyes also landed on a small metal plate, next to the door, which had 12 tiny buttons on it. Asuna watched as Oberon typed in a secret code to open and close the door. It seemed like a lot of extra work to her. Why not just make it so only someone with special admin powers could get in? But Oberon had his own way of doing things, and he wanted this place to feel like a real game. Inside these walls, he was the boss, the king of the fairies, ruling with total control over his queen. Asuna thought this was just another example of Oberon's silly pride. He reached out to play with the code pad, lost in his own little world. He was pretty far away from Asuna, so the game's filter kicked in and blurred out what he was doing. He thought he was safe because she couldn't see exactly which buttons he was pressing from that distance. And if she was looking straight at Oberon, he would have been right. There's no way she could tell. But here's the thing, he didn't really understand how the virtual world worked. The nerve gear created a fake world that felt real, but he didn't know all its secrets. There were lots of things he still had to learn. For instance, mirrors in the game didn't work like they do in real life. Asuna was faking tears while staring closely into a mirror. Behind her, Oberon came into sharp focus. But here's the weird part, in the real world, sitting super close to a mirror won't make something far away look any clearer. Yet in the game, the mirror showed a perfect reflection, like a clear picture. Something weird was going on with the game's mirror. Usually things that were far away got a little fuzzy, but not in the reflection. She could see everything super clearly, even the tiny movements of his fingers. This wasn't a new idea for her. She'd thought about it for a while now. The problem was, She never had a good chance to be near the mirror when he was at the door. That all changed today. She just had to try it. The numbers were stuck in her head. 811329. She kept repeating them, hoping she'd get it right. Finally the door creaked open, and Oberon walked through. As it shut behind him with a loud clang, she saw him stroll along a branch, his fancy black and emerald wings fluttering. He disappeared from view, leaving her waiting patiently. Asuna stood still, watching the sunlight filter through the bars of her birdcage-like prison. She was waiting for the pattern on the floor to change. A design made up of metal bars that looked like a puzzle. So far she hadn't learned much. This virtual game, Alfheim Online, was a lot like Sword Art Online. What was really surprising was that it was still up and running, and people were even joining to play. Oberon, also known as Shugu, had a creepy plan. He was using the ALO server to trap the minds of about 300 former players from Sasohi. His goal was to use them for secret and super illegal brain experiments. That's all it was. When someone asked him why he would take such a huge risk by doing these experiments inside a popular video game, he just laughed at them. Running a system like this is super expensive. We're talking millions and millions of yen just for one server. But the good news is that it will help me with my research and make money for the company at the same time. It's like killing two birds with one stone. In the end, it all comes down to making a profit. Things were looking up for Asuna though. Since this game was linked to the real world, she might just have a way out. If she were trapped in a completely closed space, she'd be stuck. But because this game was connected to people outside, she had a chance. Asuna had also picked up some useful info from Oberon. She knew that time passed differently here. Knees flew by faster in the game than they did in real life. Figuring out the real time outside was going to be tough. But Oberon came to the rescue again. She noticed that he visited her every other day, after work, using a company terminal. The best part? He was super predictable, and always on time. In fact, he was so punctual that she knew exactly when to expect him, at the same time every day. The perfect time to make a move was after he headed home and fell asleep. It's unlikely he came up with this sneaky plan all by himself though. Something fishy was definitely going on. She didn't think the whole maintenance team at LO was in on it. Just a few troublemakers. And if they all reported to Nobuyuki Shugo, there's no way they could keep an eye on everything happening in LO all through the night. Imagine working all night. Every single day of the week. It's just not possible for anyone who works in an office. But what if you could slip away when no one was looking? You could try to sneak to a computer system, and log out. If that didn't work, there had to be another way to send a message to the outside world. She flipped onto her stomach and buried her face in the pillow, just waiting for time to tick by. Lifa was amazed as she watched Kirito battle it out. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. They were soaring above the ancient forest, which covered a huge part of the northeast section of the land owned by the Sylphs. The forest stretched out before giving way to rolling hills and open plains. Swilvain was just a tiny dot in the distance now. Kirito and his friends had traveled deep into the neutral territory, where it wasn't safe at all. The monsters here were super tough. Kirito was battling 3 giant one-eyed lizards with wings. These creatures, called evil glancers, were as strong as the boss of a beginner's dungeon in the Sylph homeland. That meant they were extremely powerful. But what made them really scary was their special attack, the Evil Eye. This magical curse could weaken its victim, making it harder for them to fight back. Lifa hung back ready to jump in and help if needed. She cast a special spell to block any curses that might hit Kirito. But as she watched him fight, she started to wonder if it was even necessary. Kirito was swinging his huge sword like crazy, taking down the lizards with massive blows. He didn't seem to care about defending himself or dodging their attacks. In fact, he barely even noticed when they swiped at him from far away with their long tails. Imagine a powerful whirlpool that sucks everything in its path. That's what happened when this guy charged at the lizards. He'd hit multiple ones at once. What was even scarier was how much damage each hit did. There were 5 bad guys, called evil glancers, to start with. But soon there was only one left. When it got really hurt, below 20% health, it turned around and ran for the trees, screaming in fear. Then Lifa stepped in. She held out her hand and cast a special long-range spell that worked like a vacuum, homing in on its target. 4 or 5 glowing green boomerang-shaped blades zoomed in on the lizard, ripping off its scales. The blue reptile exploded into a cloud of sharp pointy pieces, and their 5th battle of the day was already over. It had barely started. Kirito slammed his blade back into its holder and floated through the air to Lifa. She gave him a quick salute. "Nice work," he said with a grin. "Thanks for having my back." Kirito replied. They high-fived and smiled at each other. "You know what? You fight like a crazy person," Lifa exclaimed. Kirito scratched his head, looking unsure. "You think so?" he asked. Lifa nodded. "Usually you're supposed to dodge and weave around your enemies, but you just charge in and start swinging." Kirito shrugged. "Hey, it got the job done fast, right?" But Lifa wasn't convinced. That might work when you're fighting a bunch of the same monster. But what if you're up against different kinds of enemies at once? What if you're facing players who can attack you from far away with magic? Kirito thought for a moment. Can't I just avoid getting hit by their spells? Lifa sighed. It's not that easy. There are all sorts of different spells out there, and some of them are really hard to dodge. Some blasts are super powerful and shoot straight, so you can dodge them if you see them coming. But watch out for special spells that follow you around or hurt everything in a big area. If someone is using those kinds of spells, you need to run really fast and try to time it just right, so you don't get hit. One guy looked confused and said, "I didn't have to deal with magic in my last game. I guess I have a lot to learn now." He scratched his head like he was trying to figure out a tough puzzle. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it quickly," someone replied with a smile. "Wow, you've got amazing eyesight," someone said. "Are you into sports or something?" The person replied, "No, not at all." The other person shrugged and said, "Okay, whatever. Let's keep moving." They agreed and flapped their wings. As they flew over the forest, they saw a beautiful golden-green plain stretching out before them. The sun was setting, casting a glow over everything. From that point on, they didn't run into any more monsters. As they left the ancient forest, a new landscape unfolded before them. The rocky hills stretched out, with towering mountains that rose high into the air. These mountains were so tall that Lifa and her friend had to bring their flight to an end. They touched down in a grassy corner of the plain, right at the foot of the mountain range. Lifa's boots slid across the grass as she landed, her arms flying out to balance herself. Lifa felt a weird sensation. Her wings, which weren't even real, felt tired at the base. A moment later, Kirito landed beside her and stretched his back.
"Hey, are you tired?" he asked with a grin.
Lifa replied.
"Not at all."
But then she dropped a surprise. "Actually, we're gonna take a break from flying for now." Kirito's eyebrows shot up in surprise when he heard this. "Hey, want to know a secret?" she asked, pointing to the mountains. They were covered in white caps and towered over the flat plains below. These mountains are super tall, too tall for flying. To get past them, you have to go through a cave. It's the toughest part of traveling from the Sylphlands to Allen. At least that's what I've heard. I've never actually been past this point myself. "Is the cave super long?" Kirito asked. His friend replied, "Yeah, it's really long. But don't worry, there's a special town inside where we can take a break. It's like a neutral zone for miners." Kirito checked his menu clock by waving his left hand. "It's 7 o'clock outside, so I'm good for now." His friend said, "All right. Let's keep moving then. Do you want to rotate out?" Kirito looked confused. "What do you mean by rotate out?" His friend explained. "It means we take turns, logging out of the game to rest. You know, so we don't get too tired."